In part 2, we will be applying what we learned in part 1 to solve these word problems. So let's take a look at the first one here. It's asking us, in a survey, 60 baseball fans were asked whether they thought the designated hitter rule should be changed. 41 fans thought the rule should be changed. What percent of fans surveyed said the designated hitter rule should be changed? Well, what percent? They're asking about a percent. Well, what is a percent? We talked about before that a percent is just a number. We don't know what that number is, though, over 100. And so all we're going to do is set up a fraction. Well, a fraction is a part over a whole. So let's see how we should set up this fraction. Well, the whole represents like the total. That's another number or another word we could use there. The part is a portion of this total. So let's take a look and figure out which number represents the whole or the total. So we've got two numbers here. We've got 60 fans were asked about this designated hitter. 41 fans thought the rule should be changed. So 60 were asked, 41 said change. So let's write that down. 60 were asked the question. 41 said they should change the rule. Change rule. Well, out of the 60, 41 said to change the rule. So that tells us that 60, that is our whole. And 41 said the rule should change, so that's our part. So now we know how to set up the fraction. So let's go ahead and set that up. We've got 41 is the part, and 60 is the whole. So now we know the fraction now becomes a problem like we just solved in part 1, where we changed a fraction to a percent. Well, we do that by setting up a proportion. So we're going to write down a number over 100 because that's what a percent is. So now we go ahead and do some work. So now it's just like what we had done before. 41 times by 100, that would just be 41, and then add 2 zeros. So 4100 equals, and then we do x times by 60. So that makes 60x. Well, then we do some division. So we divide by 60, and we use that same rule I talked about in part 1 to reduce this fraction, to make the division easier. Let's take out a common factor. When numbers end in zeros, we can divide by 10. And that goes with those divisibility rules I talked about. Knowing divisibility rules helps you make the problem easier. So now what we have is 410 over 6. Well, if you wanted to, we could reduce it again to even make the problem simpler than this. See, I can divide this by 2 because 2 is an even number, and 2 goes into any number that ends in an even number. So half of 410, well, half of 400 is, well, what is half of 400? It's 200. So half of 10 is 5, so that makes 205. Half of 6 is 3. Now I've made the problem a whole lot easier to deal with. So let's go ahead and set up our division problem now. 3 into 205. And so I think I would end up spending just as much time doing this division problem, 60 into 4,100, as if it is the same time, or maybe even less time if I do it this way, where I reduce the fraction. So 3 into 20 goes 6 times, and that makes 18. Now I can do the subtraction. I get 2 left over. I bring down the 5. So we do it again. So now we're going to end up figuring out what it is. 3 into 25. How many times does it go there? Well, that's 8 times. 8 times 3 makes 24. What's left over? Well, a 1. Well, we can either write this as a mixed number right now or continue going and write it as a decimal. We'll do it both ways. So we bring down the 0, add in that decimal point, bring the decimal point up, and do 3 into 10 goes 3 times, and that makes a 9, and we get the same number repeating again. So whenever we have the same number repeating, you can put that line over on top, and then we've got our answer. So 68.3 repeating percent. Well, what is that as a mixed number? Well, it's still 68. Now it's the part. The part is, well, whatever was left over at the end of the number. End of the 5 here, we had a 1 left over. So that means it's 68 and 1/3. Whatever the divisor is, goes in the denominator. And those are the answers. Either one will work. They both mean the same thing. So the key is to figure out what the fraction is to start with. And then we can figure out and change it to a percent. So the same sort of thing here. We want to figure out a fraction. We want to write a fraction as a part over a whole. So as we read this problem, let's try to figure out what the part is. So it says Lee correctly answered 34 out of 36 questions on a test. To the nearest percent, what percent of the questions did Lee answer correctly? All right, well, so they want to know to the nearest percent. So we're going to end up having to do some rounding when we get our final answer here for this question because of this. But let's go back to this. 34 out of 36. She answered correctly. So she answered correctly was 34 questions. And then there was a total of 36 questions. So there's our fraction, 34 out of 36. Well, let's go ahead and take that fraction and let's reduce it. Let's make it simpler. Because whenever we have a fraction that is complicated, like this one here seems kind of tough, let's make it easier so we don't have to deal with such difficult division. Let's take out a common factor. What goes into 34 and 36? Well, 2. They're both even numbers. So when we take half of 34, half of 30 is 15. Half of 4 is 2. 2 plus 15 makes 17. Do the same thing here. Half of 30 is 15. Half of 6 is 3. 15 and 3 is 18. So now we have an easier problem to deal with. So 7/18 is the same as 34/36. So let's use that one, 7/18, and then set up our proportion. We want to figure out what the percent is. So it's just a number over 100. So all you're going to do is you're going to cross multiply 17 times 100, which is 1700. And on the other side, it's 18 times x. So we have 18x. Well, let's go ahead and do our division. Now when we do this division, remember, 18 into 1700 seems tough. Let's go ahead and reduce it. You'll end up having a much easier time doing the division if you reduce this fraction. So let's take out the common factor. They end in even numbers. Let's take out a 2. Divide by 2. And so when we do that division, 1700. So half of 17. Well, let's do this. Let's do it off to the side. It'll go pretty quick. Half 2 goes into 17, goes in there 7, 8 times, makes 16. And so we have 16, there's 1, 0, goes into 10, 5 times, so 0, so 850. Down below we have 9. 18 divided by 2 makes 9. Alright, so now we've got our number, 9 into 850, and this is going to equal x. So now we can do that math off to the side. 9 into 850. So 9 goes into 85. How many times? 9 times. Makes 81 with a 4 left over, so 0. 9 into 40 goes 6 times. And so there we have, actually, sorry, that'd be 54. I was thinking of 36, so let's fix that real quick. It only goes 4 times. 4 times 9 is 36. So now we bring down the 4 again. Oh, we got the same number. So whenever we have the same number, that means we've got a repeating decimal. So we still have to add the decimal point here, but we have 40 again. So it's 94.4 repeating percent. Oh, but they don't want this answer. If you write this answer, even though you got the right numbers, you're not going to get the right answer because you're supposed to round to the nearest percent, Okay, so 94 is 1%, 95 is another percent. Well, 94.4 is in between these two. but which one is it closer to? And so that's where we look at the place value. Let's look at the tenths. This tenth here, and again that 4 continues to repeat, but this tenth here, is that big enough to round it up to 95, or do we round it down to 94? Well, 4 is not big enough to round it up. And so what we're going to end up doing is just leaving it at 94%. That would be the answer. Well, those are some of the problems that you'll see on tonight's homework. Good luck.